So there are a bunch of different ways to work with footage in Adobe Premiere. I'm going to again show you my preferred method, but if you have a better method that you like to do or you find something that's a little more efficient, let me know, because I always like to improve my workflow and get things going a little bit quicker. First thing we're going to do is we're going to look back at this window that we're so familiar with now, our Adobe Premiere workspace. We've got all of our files over here, all of our footage. We're going to grab one shot of footage, any shot really. We're going to just drag it and drop it over to the timeline space on the right. What that's going to do is automatically create a timeline or a sequence. I'm going to use that terminology interchangeably. It's going to create this element within your editing software. And from there, you're going, right? So I like to call the timeline kind of like the canvas, or that's kind of like, I guess that's kind of like your workspace. And then if you look at the program monitor up in the top right corner, that's kind of like your canvas. So anything you do in that workspace, in that timeline area, is going to show up in that program space. So once you have your timeline created, you can make your audio channels bigger or smaller. You can move the clip around, you can trim it. You got a bunch of tools here that you can move around. The blue bar up top is called your playhead. And so wherever your playhead sits is the frame, specifically the single frame of video that you're looking at on your program monitor. I also want to make sure that you understand basic timecode. If we look at the blue text that's in the upper left-hand corner of our timeline window, that's our master timecode for our entire sequence. We see the exact same blue text in the bottom left-hand corner of our program monitor. And if we really zoom into our timeline, we can see specifically that exact timecode on our timeline. And I guess I'll break this out for you too. When you look at your timecode, you see hours, minutes, seconds, and frames. Depending on how you edit, you will see maybe 60 frames or 59 frames. You might see 23 frames or 24 frames, or you might see 29 frames or 20 or 30 frames that make up 1 second. This is a little more advanced. It's still a basic concept that we can touch on if you're a little rusty on it. But it's important to know what frame rate you're shooting, especially if you're shooting with multiple cameras and external audio, because shooting with multiple frame rates can get very complicated and can really slow you down in the end. So it's really important to know what you're shooting with. Now, the timeline we created creates a time code based off of whatever frame rate our video was shot at. The entire timeline is actually built on all of the settings of that specific video to make it easier for the editor whenever you're working. What I want you to be doing here is getting to know the timeline, zoom in, zoom out, get to know all the tools, right? Grab another clip, pull the other clip in. Now I've got 2 clips next to each other. I'm gonna kind of roll down here and see the different tools. To see this tool specifically, I gotta pull in a bunch of clips. So I'm gonna pull in a bunch of clips. We got our normal arrow tool. It helps you select things, right? Select individual clips. But our second tool here is a select everything to the right. So once I have everything selected with that tool, I can really just kind of move things around. The next tool we see is a slip tool. I'm not really gonna focus on that right now because it's not one of the basic tools that I use frequently. Really what I'm using is the arrow tool, the select left-right tool, and the slice tool or the razor blade tool. So if you use the razor blade tool in this, you're actually cutting up the clips. We're gonna zoom into this first clip here. I'm just chopping it up, moving everything around, spacing it out. And you can see as I scroll through it, my canvas or my program screen up at the top goes black as I'm going through, right? Whenever I hit that black open space, because there's nothing there. Now, what I want to show you here is a shortcut that's very important. A shortcut that you should already know really well by using Microsoft Word or Excel or Google Sheets or even typing an email. It's the undo feature. You can click up in File or Edit and go down to Undo on any of these programs, right? But on a Mac hold Command, hit Z. Or on a PC, hold Control and hit Z. That's the undo feature. Now you're gonna see me go through here and undo this sequence to what it was when I first created it. So I'm just gonna keep tapping, I'm gonna hold Command down, and I'm just gonna keep tapping Z. Now something I should have touched on in the beginning was this file here. When I dragged and dropped that video clip onto that timeline space, it made a new timeline. It made a new sequence element or a new sequence piece in my project. We see the name here matches with the name in the upper left-hand corner of my timeline window. It's really important to rename this because what it does originally is it names it based on the clip that you created it with. Now that can get really confusing because if I export this, it's actually going to overwrite my original clip because it most likely will export it the exact same file type, which is a .mov file. So what we want to do is we want to rename this, something that makes sense. So you could do something as simple as sequence. Now this is going to let you know, oh, this is my sequence file. Like you're always going to know. You can look at the icon, the tiny, tiny icon that's right there on the edge. But you kind of want to make sure it has the word sequence in it or SEQ with a little bit more information. So we're going to move it up into our sequence folder, and I'm actually going to go ahead and rename it Cooking Scones with date. I'm renaming it with my same year, month, day naming convention, but I'm putting a small lowercase a at the bottom. So that just means that for that day, that's version A. Now, if I'm working with a client, I might have multiple versions in a day. So I'm going to show you real quick. So I've got version AB. I've got version ABC, and then maybe the next day I have version A again. Okay? That helps me organize things. And to keep it a little more organized, you want to move any old sequences you don't need anymore into an old sequences area. Why am I keeping my old sequences? Specifically because if you have a client that says they don't like something, you say, okay, you change it, you update it, send them a new cut. Well, 2 or 3 edits down the road, they might come back and say, oh, you know what? On April 4th, I really liked that one edit. I still have it here. It was at like 2 minutes in. That little piece was really good. You know, I didn't think I liked it before, but I thought about it for a little bit and I really liked it. Can we get that back in? So instead of having to backtrack and re-edit that piece and really kind of make it do what it did before, you can actually go back to the previous edit, open it up, and then pull it in and break out that one piece that really, really worked and then put it back in. I also want to make sure that you understand that when you are working with multiple sequences in one project, they will come up as multiple tabs in that timeline or sequence area. Again, I'm using timeline and sequence interchangeably, so it's okay. Sorry if it's confusing. But I want to let you know that if you're starting to duplicate sequences, make sure you're still editing the most recent sequence that you're working with. The amount of times I've made that mistake, countless. So check your names up at the top of those tabs and make sure you're working from the same project. And as always, hit Command S or Control S frequently. You want to make sure that your project is saved every step of the way. If your computer crashes or something gets weird and it closes down, lose power maybe, you want to make sure that your work is saved in its current state. So I am always just absent-mindedly muscle memory hitting Command S or Control S, depending on if I'm working on a Mac or a PC, to making sure that it's saved. So that's the basics of creating a project and starting to work with your timeline. At this point, you need to be super comfortable with your software and how to manipulate the different pieces in that software. If you're not yet, I just recommend you really sit down every day and just kind of dabble with it a little bit more and experiment with the software. Make it do things that you don't even know how to do. Try to emulate something that you see on TV, on YouTube, or on a social media platform. Try to make something really neat. From here, the next steps are really getting into the edit and really fine-tuning and edit. Building an A cut, building a B cut, building a draft cut. Those are the next steps, and so we'll see you on those videos. Thanks.